everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for a little bit of a life catch-up, share my story video. So we are doing something a little bit different today because we are not talking about books. Well, it's in the thumbnail, so you essentially know what we're going to talk about today. But today I want to share with you guys my experience over the last few years of trying and so far failing to have children. So it's been a difficult time over the last 3.5 years. I was really hoping that I would be filming a very different video by this point in the journey. I was hoping that this would be a video where I was able to say, it's been really hard, but hey, it worked out. But that hasn't happened yet, so this is just going to be here's some stuff that has been going on in my life recently. So it's been hard and I really want to share that with you. But before I go any further into my tale of woe, I do really want to acknowledge some of the other things that have been happening in the world in general over the last few years, because as much as it has been a difficult thing for both myself and my partner Rowan, we still are extremely privileged in a number of different ways, and I didn't think that it was fair or right to talk about the difficult time we've been having without discussing some of those other things that have been going on. So over the last few years, of course, the first thing that we all know has been really awful is the COVID-19 pandemic. Many millions of people have died because of COVID. Many millions of people have been forced into poverty and terrible living situations because of COVID. Many people have lost loved ones and have gone through really terrible things due to this pandemic. Many frontline workers have experienced really horrendous situations and horrendous working conditions and been putting their life on the line for months and months because of this situation. Even those of us who have been just having to deal with being in lockdown and not getting to see friends or family and not feeling safe in our communities, that has been hard, let alone all of the other stuff that I just talked about. So that is the very obvious thing that has happened in the last few years and is still ongoing at the moment. But there's other things that have been really difficult. We also have, as an Australian and not an American, it's probably a bit difficult for me to say this, but generally Trump making really horrendous decisions, mismanaging a number of things and not just a global pandemic, has really affected obviously America, but around the world. Within this time period, Britain voted to leave the European Union, and that has caused all sorts of issues across not just the United Kingdom but the entirety of Europe, and will affect the financial stability and the livelihood and lifestyle and lives of many people living in the UK. Tensions in the Persian Gulf are ongoing, and I think it seems like will remain ongoing, but have really increased over the last few years, and there's been almost war several times. This Venezuelan government basically collapsed and threw the country into a state of crisis, both financial and human rights crises. Yemen has been thrown into civil war, and 14,000 people have died as a direct result of the war, and as many as 50,000 people have died due to war-induced famine. Many prominent, well-known people, particularly in the media and entertainment industry, have been called out for sexual misconduct, which has sparked the global Me Too movement, looking at how many thousands and millions of women are the victim of sexual assault and sexual harassment just across the board. Last year, George Floyd was killed by police, along with many other Black Americans who have been victims of police brutality for many, many years, but the death of George Floyd particularly threw a light on that situation and brought out many people protesting about police brutality and sparking a rise in the Black Lives Matter movement. This has not just been something that has been a focus in America, but it really threw the rest of the world into stark relief and made us all focus on the fact that racism is still very much a problem across the world, and it forced us all to really look at that. It is ongoing. Unfortunately, this didn't really seem to change much, and most recently violence has again broken out in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. This is a situation that is extremely volatile, and there is often violence between Israel and Palestine, particularly in Gaza and on the West Bank, but it has been a really big outbreak of violence and retribution recently. There are many other things that have occurred throughout the last few years that have been really terrible, and I'm sure that any of you watching right now could list many, many, many things. I will try to make sure that I find sources and also places where you can go to help, whether it be financially or whether it be offering time or whatever it might be, and I'll put those things in the description below so you can go and get all of that information and do anything that you can. But for the purposes of this particular video, I didn't want to talk about myself and my own experiences without acknowledging that in the grand scheme of things, the honest truth is that some difficulty with fertility is by no means a terrible tragedy. Certainly not in the way that all of the things I just mentioned are terrible tragedies. However, that does not diminish people who experience difficulties with fertility, difficulties having children, people who experience miscarriage or ectopic pregnancies. So if you are watching this and you are anyone who has experienced anything like that, going through that at the moment, I am not trying to minimize this. I know that this is a really difficult thing to experience, so I am not offering, here's a whole laundry list of terrible things as a way to make anyone feel less in their suffering or in their experience. However, this particular video is a video where I would like to talk to you guys about my experiences trying, and like I said, for the time being, failing to be a parent. And it's been really hard. It continues to be really hard. So we have to go all the way back to 2018. We actually started trying in 2017, but you know, when you first start trying, you get told that basically they won't worry about it until it's been around a year, which is fair enough. You know, we don't really know. We don't really know when these things are going to happen. There's all sorts of biological things that need to occur in alignment in order for a person to fall pregnant. Anyway, 9 months in, and yay, guess what? I'm pregnant. Unfortunately, this wasn't to work out. It ended up being an ectopic pregnancy. Ectopic pregnancy and miscarriage are different in a number of ways. I have to consider myself fortunate in that I've never experienced a miscarriage, but I can talk to you about an ectopic pregnancy. So an ectopic pregnancy is basically a pregnancy that occurs outside of the uterus. So that usually is in the fallopian tube, and we don't want that to happen. The uterus is particularly designed to stretch and accommodate a growing baby. The fallopian tube or the ovary or any other organ in that general area is not designed to be able to accommodate a growing fetus. So if you end up having a pregnancy that does not attach itself to the uterine lining, then this is not a good thing. It's not going to be viable. It's not going to result in you having a baby in 9 months. So this is where we were in June, July of 2018. I was pregnant, but it wasn't viable. Anyway, I started bleeding, thinking, you know, this is fairly common. It's just spotting, trying to keep myself calm. I was worried enough that I went to the doctor. The doctor basically said, keep an eye on it, go to the hospital if it increases, which is what we ended up doing. They thought I was most likely miscarrying, so not much they can do, send me home. But the bleeding didn't stop. They couldn't find anything. So they couldn't find, when they first tested to see what was happening, the fact that they thought I was miscarrying, they wanted to see whether it had miscarried or not. They couldn't find anything. They continue not to find anything. When all this is going on, to check that things are happening the way they're supposed to, I know it's weird to say because nobody wants to think of a miscarriage as being normal or natural, but to a certain extent, it is. It is the body saying this is not a viable embryo, this will not end up being a baby, so we need to get rid of it, basically. I know those are harsh things to hear, but anyway, that's essentially what's going on in a miscarriage. So anyway, the point being that they needed to check that things were happening the way they were supposed to happen. If you have a miscarriage, there's that, you know, it's supposed to basically stop being in your body anymore. So one of the ways that they test this is to do fairly regular blood tests. Part of the reason that they do those blood tests is to check if there's something else going on, because it turns out that sometimes you don't miscarry, sometimes that's because it's an ectopic pregnancy. The pregnancy is not in the uterus and it's somewhere else. The body is actually attempting to miscarry, but it's not managing to miscarry, and this is where it becomes quite dangerous. I was very scared at this point because the doctor, I mean, I'm sure that he was trying to do the right thing because, you know, it is dangerous, but he basically scared the crap out of me by telling me that if this was allowed to continue, then I could potentially die, because it would either rupture, which can be fatal because it ruptures the entire fallopian tube, or it would cause bleeding to go into my stomach and that would kill me. So basically, you're not really given a choice. You have to get rid of this pregnancy, but the body isn't doing that naturally, so you have to, it has to be done medically. There are a number of ways that this can happen. It depends on how far along you are. It depends on where it is. It depends on the situation. In a way, I was very fortunate because it was quite early and they were able to deal with it by giving me medication and they didn't have to go in surgically. So, yay! This in and of itself, though, was actually really scary because what they give you is the same drug that they give to fight cancer. It's called methotrexate, and apparently what fetuses and cancer cells have in common is that they grow really fast. So methotrexate attacks fast-growing cells, which means that it can be used to kill off cancer or pregnancy. So that's what they gave me. Now, if I wasn't kind of terrified enough because if I didn't do this I could die, and they're giving me pretty scary sounding medication, then the nurse who actually gave it to me, because that's basically her job that day, is to give women, or in this particular context, women who are having an ectopic pregnancy, this particular shot, it's highly toxic in large enough doses. So she was all kitted out in the full regalia with the face mask and everything, which I realise, of course, now is a lot more of a common sight, but not something back in 2018 that I had ever really seen. So yeah, that was kind of scary. And then you have a full double-sided A4 page of various things you had to keep an eye on, and you had to tick each one to make sure that the doctor knew that you had seen it and read it and were aware of what could potentially be an outcome of having this medication. So that in and of itself was kind of scary, but they assured me that it was probably going to be fine. This was something they had to do, but everything was fine. This was the only option, basically. So we did the only option. I know that other people who have miscarriages, I assume other people who have ectopic pregnancies, mourn the baby they couldn't have. I occasionally do think to myself, you know, I could have a 2-year-old, but I don't it just all happened so quickly, and it was never put to me in a way that implied that it was a choice. It was essentially life or death for me. So, I mean, I guess that it's a debate that people have, and I understand that. It was never going to be a viable pregnancy. It was never going to be a child. I mean, yes, it had technically fertilized, but it was never going to result in a child, in a baby, because it was only ever going to either be dealt with medically or be a really big, potentially life-ending issue. So I don't get to July of whatever and think to myself, this is the anniversary of this thing that happened, and mourn a baby. I am not saying any of that to imply that other people shouldn't, or make a comment really on other people's way that they deal with grief at all. That's just my experience. Anyway, that's not why this is coming out in July. I just realised that those things were connected. I honestly hadn't put that together in that way before, which... Anyway, so yeah, that happened. Now the thing with having an ectopic pregnancy and having to have these drugs is that you can't then try for another 3 or 4 months, because it was 3 months at the very smallest amount of time, because any lingering drug in your system would just kill off the new fast-growing cells, kill off the new baby. There was that. I mean, that was kind of hard in and of itself. 3 months isn't very long, but when you've been trying for 9 months and then you're all excited and then it doesn't go well and then you have to have this medical procedure that will put an end to it and then you can't try again for 3 months, it's kind of hard to hear. Then my little sister was getting married and she decided to get married in Thailand. At this point we were trying again, but I had a conversation with some friends, and a friend of mine was talking about Zika virus and the fact that Zika virus can cause really terrible complications and birth defects, and it's advised that if you are pregnant you should not go to somewhere where Zika virus is a potential thing that you can catch. Not so much in the coastal areas of Thailand, but certainly in the jungle areas of Thailand, the Zika virus is unfortunately very common, very prevalent. So to be safe, we shouldn't try until about 3 months after we got back from Thailand, to allow that if I had Zika virus, then it would be out of my system by then. So that actually added another 9 months, because at this point we were going to Thailand 3 months after the 3 months would end, or roughly thereabouts. Anyway, the point to talk about the amount of time, when you have various reasons why you've had to stop and start trying to have children, it makes the calculation of how much time has been that you've been trying a little bit difficult. And the reason why that's important is because I am in my 40s, and thank you. Rowan just gave me tea. Thanks, Rowan.
You're welcome.
And Peanut just gave me words.
Important Peanut words.
Actually, she's giving them to Rowan, but I can pretend. Well, I was in my late 30s at the time that we started, but I am now in my 40s, and the older you get, the smaller your fertility becomes. So it's an issue. Time is an issue. Time is a factor at my age. Anyway, it kind of did make that a little bit tricky to calculate, and to then be able to have conversations with medical professionals about, well, it's been X amount of time, maybe we need to look into what is, if anything, is going on. But it did get to a point where it had been quite a while. We thought maybe it was good to go and see if we could find out if there was anything going on. Enter another really interesting experience. Basically, for this particular one, I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but they basically organise a way in which they can blow air into your uterus that's then supposed to monitor whether the air then gets through the fallopian tubes and into elsewhere. Because they can't well, it's actually, that's not true. It's not air, it's dye, because they can't actually see the very specific ends of the fallopian tubes with ultrasound. So they put the dye through, and then it runs through into the ovaries basically, and then that's when they can see it. It turns out that when there is a blockage in your fallopian tubes, it hurts because there's all this pressure of them trying to get dye to go from one place to another, and there's something blocking it. So that was an interesting, weird, kind of painful experience. But I mean, it didn't last very long, and now we know. Both my fallopian tubes are blocked. So it's likely that what happened with the ectopic pregnancy is that the sperm could get through to the egg in the fallopian tube, which is exactly what they're supposed to do, fertilize, which again is what it's supposed to do, and then the egg couldn't get back out into the uterus, which is what it's supposed to do. There's basically, like, I don't know, 1% chance, or probably less, that I could fall pregnant naturally, or that if I did, it would result in a viable pregnancy, as opposed to another ectopic pregnancy. So realistically, the only way that I can carry a baby to term is through in vitro fertilization. And my battery is flashing at me, so I'll be right back. Okay, we have a new battery. We have hopefully a cool enough to drink cup of tea. Let's keep on talking. Now, up until this moment when we discovered this thing, I had been not looked very favourably upon doing IVF myself. Because I had heard that it was really, really hard, emotionally, physically, and financially. And I wasn't sure that it was a route that I really wanted to go down. I had been hoping that it wouldn't be a thing we would have to look into, but anyway. The doctor suggested that we talk to someone about what our options were, including IVF. So we found a really great gyno. I just randomly found this person through Google, but she has been absolutely amazing. Really understanding and really kind and thoughtful, but also really direct and, not afraid to kind of be honest and tell you how it is, but really understanding of emotions and stuff. So she's been really, really great. This was last year. This was probably about April or May last year where we found out what was going on, and then we started looking into what to do. Making appointments and talking about options and all of those things. So I'd been I'm not going to say anti, that's totally not the right word, and also it makes an implication for a different reason, but not entirely convinced about the viability of it for us. But we talked about, to the specialist, we talked about what the options were, and they did other tests to see what else was going on, and it turns out there are a variety of things that could be wrong, and there are a variety of different ways that IVF is then a response, or different versions of IVF, as it were. My problem is that I have blocked fallopian tubes. My ovaries are still producing eggs, they just aren't connecting to the sperm. In that regard, from an IVF point of view, we are in the easy basket, because they don't have to they don't have to give you treatment that will get the ovaries to produce the eggs, because they're not producing the eggs. What they do is they collect the eggs that are being produced, do the in vitro fertilization, and then pop it back in. From that point of view, we are again extremely fortunate, because it is a lot less invasive and it is a lot cheaper. So that has been, it's still hard, but that has been really good, because it's an option we can take. This is where I again need to say that I am really grateful and aware that I'm really privileged, because the option of doing IVF isn't available to, most of the world. So when I say it's been hard, I know that it could be harder. Anyway, so we started our first round in November last year, and what this particular version of IVF is, it's called a stimulated round, the first one that you do, but the doctor essentially called ours IVF light. I still have to have injections. They still stimulate the ovaries, but rather than stimulating the ovaries to do a thing that they aren't doing, i.e. produce eggs, they stimulate the ovaries to get the ovaries to produce multiple eggs, because where they can, they want to harvest multiple eggs so that they can do fewer rounds of stimulation. So we did the first one in November. That is kind of weird and confronting in and of itself, because you have to inject yourself. Now, again, I say that fully aware that there are multiple diseases and health issues that involve people having to inject themselves on a regular basis. So again, this is from my experience, as opposed to this is a terrible thing that no one else has had to experience. But I hadn't had that experience before, so it was a little bit weird and confronting. The particular version that I had is that you start out with the second day of your period, you start injecting a hormone into your stomach. This is the thing that stimulates the ovaries to start trying to produce eggs. About 5 days after that, you start injecting another hormone into your stomach. This one is to stop the ovaries from ovulating until they're supposed to, because basically if they ovulate too early, then they're gone, because when an egg isn't fertilized, it dissolves. So they want to stimulate the ovaries to produce as many eggs as possible, but they don't want the eggs to then be released into your system, into the fallopian tubes, until the time when they are able to collect them. So you start taking another hormone to stop that from happening. And then a few days after that, they do a scan to see what's going on, what is happening on the follicles in the ovaries, does it look like it's working, when we'll be ready, blah blah blah. That is when they set the date for the egg collection. It kind of sounds like we're going to go out to the chicken coop and get some eggs in a basket. I mean, I guess I guess you could say that's the same. That's what they're doing. But basically, a doctor collects eggs from your ovaries. They suck it up through a vacuum cleaner, basically. Another kind of weird experience. For whatever reason, where I live, they do it, and in this particular surgery that I've been going to, they do it in the morning. So you go in reasonably early in the morning, go through all the things they have to go through, do your blood pressure. That's another thing. I have high blood pressure. That's an issue. But anyway, give you a bunch of drugs, painkillers, things to keep you calm, stuff like that. And you sit around and wait for those things to start kicking in. It has been duly noted by the doctor how many different books I have been reading whenever she sees me. Anyway, and then they take you in to the operating room, and there's probably about 7 or 8 people in there doing all sorts of various things. One person is kind of standing at your head, essentially telling you you'll be okay. There are people doing the actual collection. There are people there to look and see how many eggs they got, because they suck out they suck out everything out of the ovaries. Eggs are very small and very hard to see, so they have to suck all the liquid out, all of the stuff out, and then look at it under a microscope and then say, yes, there are this many eggs. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the trigger shot. So you have a final shot, which has to be exactly 36 hours before your procedure is scheduled to take place. That triggers the ovaries to then actually release the eggs so that they can collect them. All that's set up, you get told exactly when, so you have to do that. So it might be, 9 o'clock at night, Friday night, and then Sunday morning you're going to go in for your procedure. It has to be at 9 o'clock at night. Anyway, so then the next step after the eggs have been collected is you don't actually have to, once you've taken your trigger shot, you don't have to take any more things. The injections stop and everything. Then they attempt to fertilize your eggs. So depending on how many eggs they've collected, basically they will attempt to fertilize all of them. Now when I say attempt, that's exactly what I mean. They can't, just because it's a medical intervention doesn't mean that they can actually guarantee that any of these processes will work. So they insert a sperm into an egg, but then it's really up to the egg and the sperm to get it together to actually start multiplying and turning into a blastocyst, which is what you want. Anyway, so they attempt to fertilize all of the eggs, and then they just monitor what happens. For 5 days, they monitored. But they let you know how many eggs were fertilized. So let's say, for example, you got 10 eggs though, and 6 were fertilized. So obviously 4 of them are useless, 6 are fertilized. So then they keep them in, I don't even know what. I feel like I should know what, but they keep them in a lab in something for 5 days and monitor it and see if it's doing what it's supposed to do. And then on the 5th day, that's when they take one of the blastocysts and insert it back into your uterus. And again, there's no guarantee that it will implant. It's then up to the blastocyst to implant in your uterine line. If that happens, you are pregnant. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You're not pregnant. We did the first round in November, as I'm sure you can guess. It was not successful. It did not implant. So that was that. We then had to have a review appointment, but we couldn't get one until January, so that was 2 months. They were probably the longest 2 months, of my life is a stretch, but they were a long 2 months. Anyway, so then we had the review appointment, and then we tried again in February. Now, the doctor did say that, the gyno did say that there was unlikely to be a huge amount of physical effect. It can have an emotional effect doing IVF because there's all sorts of emotions to do with infertility and trying to have a baby and all of that stuff anyway, but yeah, there was usually not much of a physical effect. I don't know if I was experiencing a physical effect because the hormones were actually just doing that, or whether it was psychosomatic or whether it was emotional, but either way, I was really, really tired. My November round, I was really tired. I'd basically go to work, do the job, come home, out. And I was pretty much useless for the rest of that day. And it really affected my emotions. I wasn't like crying all the time, but I was feeling fairly down and so on. And then obviously it didn't work. And the day that I found out that it didn't work, I feel like I just kind of turned off. I couldn't speak. Like, I couldn't form sentences. All I could do was kind of just sit and stare. I was devastated. I know that it's highly unlikely that the first round will work. So I don't know what made me think that I would be one of the 0.002% of people who the first round of IVF works, but apparently I did, because it not working was, yeah, it was hard. Anyway, so, and then we couldn't try again until February, so we tried again in February. Now, here in Australia, February is the beginning of the school term, beginning of the school year. I've been working as a teacher since 2012. I have also worked in childcare. I have had multiple positions doing multiple things. For various reasons, I have not managed to become a regular classroom teacher, despite trying. I'm actually okay with that these days. I'm kind of like, it's fine. I mean, an ongoing, regular, permanent classroom teacher is what I mean. I have done classroom work. Anyway, I was offered the position of grade 6 teacher 2 days a week, which I was super excited about. The teacher who I would be working with is a really great person. She's a great teacher. I really, really, really like her. We get along really well. We enjoy each other's company. We thought it would work perfectly. So I was super excited that that was going to happen. But in February is when that all kicks off. And if you are a teacher, you would know that the first bit of the year is really important, but also kind of tricky, because you've just got a whole new group of kids. They don't know you don't know them, you're trying to set up routines, you're trying to get to know them, etc, etc. Now, aforementioned IVF really messes with my physicality, but also my emotions, so the combination of that and doing a new job and kind of feeling pressure about the fact that, you know, like I hadn't really had the opportunity to be the ongoing classroom teacher, plus having to share a class, even though, like I said, my co-teacher is amazing, still sharing a class. Grade 6 are kind of a beast unto themselves, so it's a tricky year. The combination of all of those things just, I was not okay. I was not coping. So again, I'm really, really fortunate that Rowan is amazing and financially solvent, because I was able to take some time off work and focus on IVF, focus on what I need. So February, did a round, it didn't work. March, we did a round, it didn't work. And this one was worse because we didn't manage to get, my body made one egg. It's supposed to make a number of eggs. They did have one, but it didn't get fertilized. So kind of reached the point where we needed to have a big think about some stuff. And we had a big chat with the gynecologist. She gave me a number of different options of things that we could try, but basically we needed to take some time and try some things and think about some stuff. She kept repeating that it's not a magic ticket. These options, one of them is lose weight, which is fine. It's fine. It's just one of those things that gets my back up a bit, because it's so often the response to issues, particularly when it comes to women. But there is evidence that being healthier, physically fitter, is good for you in general, and that it helps with fertility. But I've seen plenty of people who are a similar size to me get pregnant. It's difficult to really understand how much of an effect it would have, and to not feel like it's another area where it's not okay to be plus size. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic of conversation, but I've been doing stuff, I've been trying. I wouldn't say I was trying super hard. I didn't put myself on a crazy limited diet, and I didn't start running marathons, but I've been doing some things. Granted, not over the last couple of days, but I've been doing some stuff. I've been trying to get fit and lose weight. Anyway, the other thing is to take some vitamins, particular kind of vitamin. We also decided to have a break, partly because my emotions, and partly because we need time to actually have these things take effect. We did have a review appointment with our gynecologist a couple of weeks ago, and we've decided to push it out to August. Ideally, these stimulated cycles are supposed to result in potentially 3-4 multiple embryos that we can try with. We only have one frozen embryo. The gynecologist suggested that we use that next time around. So that's what we're going to do. Now, because we only have one frozen embryo, this does mean that it's going to be a lot harder at a later point if we decide that we want to try to have more than one child. But the way I'm currently feeling, just getting one would be amazing. Yeah, so that is what's been going on. I don't know how many people would remember, but last year in November, December, I talked about trying to read a couple of books that I just was not in the right headspace for. This is why. You may all remember me talking about needing to take a break from work. This is why. Sometimes I'm okay. Sometimes I'm really not. Yeah, a thing where you notice something that you want that you don't have that other people have more. I see babies and toddlers like everywhere. I feel like the universe is punking me. This is totally an exaggeration, but it feels like every single book, TV show, movie that I watch will somehow inevitably come back round to people trying to have kids. That's really hard. So anyway, this has been a really long video. I think I'm pretty much done with the tale of woe of Mel. Hope that if you have experienced anything like what I'm talking about, that this has helped you in any way. I am not certain whether I'm going to disable comments on this video or not, so normally I would say comment below, but I'm not sure. If I decide not to disable comments, please comment below if you want to offer words of support. If you want to give advice, I really, really want to appreciate it, and I will really appreciate that you want to give me advice. But in all honesty, even advice can sometimes be hard to hear. So maybe err on the side of don't. Basically, if you want to give me a supportive comment, then I will really appreciate it. But I don't know what will upset me, and I may end up deleting comments, so please don't take it personally if I do. That action is not me commenting on your comment, it is me trying to look after my own mental health. Anyway, the point being that I guess we'll just monitor to see how we go. Thank you so much for watching this incredibly long-winded video. Thank you so much for your support. Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna finish this tea and probably turn the heater on because it's getting cold. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this video was interesting, helpful, something. This is a bit of an anomaly for me. I normally make bookish videos, so if you like books, then I'd love it if you subscribe to this channel, and I would love it if you would give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.